Hello, everyone. We're pleased to have each of you join us for segment one of our executive development series for pharma and life sciences CEOs. Our first segment topic is FDA compliance and rising expectations, presented to you by Brian Nadel. My name is Josie Titone. I'm president and CEO of Wilway Global Executive Search, and I will be your moderator today. To set some brief context, for those of you not familiar with our complimentary executive development series, it's a 3-segment series designed to bring community and development to those who serve within this meaningful industry. One of our commitments to our stakeholders has always been centered around delivering impactful insights which address your specific needs. This series demonstrates our multidimensional approach, which does just that. Please note that topics and speakers within this community are at the direct request from your peers. And when this topic was identified by one of your peers, I was thrilled to partner with our speaker, Brian, as he brings depth, breadth, and versatile perspective, which includes FDA industry and consulting experience for the past 25 years. His commentary will certainly shed some light on this topic, and I am looking forward to turning it over to Brian in just a moment. I wanted to also say very quickly that this topic came with commentary such as, we want to hear the truth of the matter. We encourage you to ask questions anytime during the conversation by typing them in the confidential chat box. Your questions will be addressed anonymously at the end of the discussion, and it's with great pleasure to turn it over to Brian Nadel to personally introduce himself and take us through the subject matter, which is being described as one of the most pressing topics discussed within industry today. Brian, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Josie. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brian Nadel. I'm the president and sole proprietor of Brian G. Nadel GMP Consulting, LLC. I have over 25 years of diverse experience in pharmaceutical quality assurance and quality systems, FDA pre-approval and inspection readiness inspections, international CGMP auditing for finished drug products, active pharmaceutical ingredients, fermentation, process validation, and botanical extraction. Thank you. And now we will move on to today's presentation. These rising expectations by FDA and other regulatory agencies can be prevented. And these are just a list of questions. These are some things that I see often in companies, clients that I work with, or clients that I inspected when I worked with FDA. I'm going to go through these questions and maybe explain a little bit more about them when we have some time. Are you taking regulatory risks? Are you using planned deviations? Are you worried about FDA or other regulators finding out about these things that you are hiding? Are you aware of items which need to be corrected? As far as I'm concerned, call it what you want. Regulatory risks are you're doing things to continue your manufacturing process so you can continue to sell your products, but you might not be doing a regulatory filing. You might not have revalidated your process, and you might not be reporting everything that you should be reporting to the regulators who should be notified. As far as planned deviations, I find that to be almost like an oxymoron, in that if you have written procedures, you should be following them. And just because you write a planned deviation, that's almost like saying, well, we plan to not follow our process. And the only legitimate reason for having planned deviations, as far as I'm concerned, would be, for example, when you have process validation batches where you may be stressing the manufacturing process, or you may be collecting additional samples and things like that. So you are deviating from your normal sampling and stressing your manufacturing process. And, like I said, if you're worried about FDA and you're aware of these items which need to be corrected, then go ahead and correct them. If you answered yes to any of the previous questions, then the question is, why aren't you practicing continuous quality improvement? Are you familiar with ICH Q10? I gave the URL for ICH Q10, which is on the Pharmaceutical Quality System. I think that's very important. ICH Q10 describes one comprehensive model for an effective pharmaceutical quality system that is based on International Standards Organization, ISO, quality concepts. It includes applicable good manufacturing practice regulations, and it complements ICH Q8, which is pharmaceutical development, and ICH Q9, which is quality risk management. ICH Q10 is a model for a pharmaceutical quality system that can be implemented throughout the different stages of a product life cycle. Much of the content of ICH Q10 is applicable to manufacturing sites and is currently specified by regional GMP requirements. Okay, ICH Q10, which is the pharmaceutical quality system, will facilitate continual improvement of process performance and product quality. It also encompasses quality risk management. It requires that you have a quality manual. I hope if you don't have one, you start writing one soon. It also requires management to take responsibility, and requires a quality policy, which is another thing I recommend you start writing if you do not have one already. And as I put down at the end, please read the other sections included in this very important ICH guideline Q10. Have you already corrected everything found during internal and external audits? Have you instituted effective corrective and preventative actions for all of these observations? Have you adequately investigated customer complaints? Have you conducted risk analyses for these problems? Have your manufacturing and testing procedures been adequately validated and verified? What about problems that occur because that's how we've always done it? What about problems that you may be aware of internally but never got around to correcting? Are you using correct risk management tools? In the ICH guideline Q9 on quality risk management, which I provided the URL in blue below, again, I say please read this guidance also if you haven't already read it. I'm not going to go into detail on this because some of these risk management tools are quite complicated. Okay, in relation to pharmaceuticals, there are a variety of stakeholders, including patients and medical practitioners, as well as government and industry. The protection of the patient by managing the risk to quality should be considered of prime importance. The manufacturing and use of a drug or medicinal product, including its components, necessarily entails some degree of risk. The risk to its quality is just one component of the overall risk. And again, I'm asking you to please read this guidance if you haven't already done it, and try to use these effective tools. There are many things we should be doing according to 21 CFR Part 211, Current Good Manufacturing Practice for Finished Pharmaceuticals. I just took a few sections in the next couple of slides to demonstrate the importance of following these regulations. I didn't identify the specific regulation numbers, but I'm sure we're all familiar with them. Ensure that the drug product has the safety, identity, strength, quality, and purity that it purports or is represented to possess. Ensure that each lot of components, drug product containers, and closures shall be withheld from use until the lot has been sampled, tested, or examined as appropriate, and released for use by the quality control unit. There shall be written procedures for production and process control designed to ensure that the drug products have the identity, strength, quality, and purity they purport or are represented to possess. Such procedures shall include all requirements in this subpart. These written procedures, including any changes, shall be drafted, reviewed, and approved by the appropriate organizational units and reviewed and approved by the quality control unit. Written production and process control procedures shall be followed in the execution of the various production and process control functions and shall be documented at that time. Laboratory controls. This one is pretty important. The establishment of any specifications, standards, sampling plans, test procedures, or other laboratory control mechanisms required by this subpart, including any change in such specifications, standards, sampling plans, test procedures, or other laboratory control mechanisms, shall be drafted by the appropriate organizational unit and reviewed and approved by the quality control unit. The requirements in this subpart shall be followed and shall be documented at the time of performance. Any deviation from the written specifications, standards, sampling plans, test procedures, or any other laboratory control mechanisms shall be recorded and justified. Laboratory controls shall include the establishment of scientifically sound and appropriate specifications, standards, sampling plans, and test procedures designed to assure that components, drug product containers, closures, and in-process materials, labeling, drug products conform to appropriate standards of identity, strength, quality, and purity. Laboratory controls shall include testing and release for distribution. For each batch of drug product, there shall be appropriate laboratory determination of satisfactory conformance to final specifications for the drug product, including the identity and strength of each active ingredient prior to release. All drug product production and control records, including those for packaging and labeling, shall be reviewed and approved by the quality control unit to determine compliance with all established, approved written procedures before a batch is released or distributed. Any unexplained discrepancy, including a percentage of theoretical yield exceeding the maximum or minimum percentages established in master production and control records, or the failure of a batch or any of its components to meet any of its specifications, shall be thoroughly investigated, whether or not the batch has already been distributed. The investigation shall extend to other batches of the same drug product and other drug products that may have been associated with a specific failure or discrepancy. A written record of the investigation shall be made and shall include the conclusions and follow-up. This production record review regulation, which I just read, is very important, and you see that coming up quite often. Basically, we could summarize that as if you find a problem with one batch, there can and will be problems with other batches manufactured around the same time, during the same campaign, using the same equipment, or that were affected by the same discrepancy. FDA is now requiring that we have approved quality agreements with all of our suppliers. Although this is not currently a CGMP regulation, It is a regulation in the EU or EMEA. Please ensure that you have adequate agreements with all your suppliers. If you don't, then you must get purchasing, legal, and quality to create these agreements. I have found these quality agreements to be quite useful when problems with suppliers do occur. So again, this one I purposely wrote as an example, even though it's not written as a CGMP regulation. FDA is enforcing it, and they do expect you to have quality agreements. I have been working for European companies who have been written up for this, and that is not having quality agreements with all of their suppliers. Now, is the term FDA inspectors or investigators? The team leaders that conduct inspections of your firm are investigators, not inspectors. Investigators are required to have a bachelor's degree with at least 30 credits of an appropriate major in their studies. Inspectors are only required to have an associate's degree. They mostly collect import samples and earn lower salaries than investigators, and they certainly don't travel all over the world to conduct foreign inspections. Please address these investigators with their appropriate titles. The other people who are with the investigator, who's always the team leader, are considered to be analysts, be they chemists and microbiologists, and you should refer to them as with their appropriate titles. Kindly respect all of these FDA employees, and they may treat you with similar respect. Now, although you may go to PDA conferences or other big conferences and hear everybody calling the people who visit your company and write observations as inspectors, they're not inspectors. Perhaps it's because they're doing inspections of your company, but their actual title is investigators, and they may be insulted if you keep referring to them as inspectors. Data integrity is now being seriously investigated by FDA and other regulators. The regulation is a 21 CFR Part 11 for electronic records and electronic signatures. I did provide the URL for you below in blue. There is not enough time to adequately discuss this serious problem regarding falsification of data. There are both US and other foreign countries, and I put that in parentheses, some other countries which may be having some problems with data integrity that have received warning letters recently on this subject. So it's not simply only foreign companies. It's happening in the US, it's happening in Canada, it's happening in Europe, and FDA is taking it very seriously these days. So I hope that you're not involved in any of this, because it's almost like euphemism, data integrity, but it's also falsification, and it could also lead to fraud and conspiracy charges when you do get caught falsifying records. Violations of 21 CFR Part 11 could lead to consent decrees in the US, multi-million-dollar disgorgement fines. What a disgorgement fine is a penalty for all the profits that you've made during the time that you weren't following CGMPs. And I believe the largest disgorgement fine so far has been $500 million that was issued to a firm that recently merged with a larger firm. I don't like naming names, so I'm sure we're all quite familiar with that. Another problem that you could have is being placed on FDA's import alert list for foreign manufacturers. That basically stops you from selling product in the United States. And as we all know, due to the high prices of pharmaceuticals in the United States is considered the bread and butter of the pharmaceutical industry. And if you're placed on FDA's import alert list, then you can't sell your products in the United States until you clear up all your problems. Basically, they're questioning the reliability of all your data, not just the data that they may consider to be falsified. It then calls into question whether all your data can be considered falsified, and you may have to take steps such as an audit by 5 or 6 full-time consultants who may take 6 months to a year to prove that most of your data is acceptable. Being classified by FDA as official action indicated. That's how they classify your inspections. And when you're classified as official action indicated, that means that FDA will not review any new submissions that you may file, or not. They will not review any changes to already approved applications. So if you have an inspection which is classified as official action indicated, it basically stops you dead as far as selling new products. And everybody's aware of these things because you probably will end up with a warning letter. Your warning letter will be posted on the CDER website. Your stock will go down. You may lose your competitive edge over your competition. Your firm may stagnate for at least 2 years. And the reason why I'm stating 2 years is because it's assuming that you have a successful reinspection at least 1 year after the official action indicated inspection that caused the problems altogether. And caused the problems is something I want to discuss about later. FDA does not cause your problems. The problems are your lack of compliance or your intentional doing nothing about your problems that you may be aware of. You may lose employees, you may lose customers, and you may lose investors, excuse me. You hope that you lose investigators and they leave you alone. The investors we want to keep coming. Do you have a written procedure for regulatory inspections? Although this standard operating procedure is not required by CGMP, it will benefit you when you are inspected. This procedure is a requirement by COFEPRIS, and I spelled out the Spanish name for that acronym. It's basically Mexico's Ministry of Health. They also get involved in some other countries that are around them, like Venezuela and a few of the other Central American and South American countries. Having your staff trained on a well-written SOP will help for these inspections to result more favorably for your firm. Your employees will know how to behave during regulatory inspections. They will know what to say and what not to say. I have written these SOPs for many companies that I work for and many companies that I have consulted with, and they're quite helpful in really teaching your people how to behave during regulatory inspections. And it's quite important that people don't panic and get all nervous. Take better control of your audits. If you know that FDA is making an incorrect assumption regarding an observation that they're going to write you up for, you can politely tell FDA why they are incorrect before they leave your site. Do not get angry and raise your voice. I like to call this a scientific or regulatory debate. You can provide documents or appropriate personnel to explain why FDA is incorrect. Do not believe that anything is off the record. They can and will write anything you say in their establishment inspection reports. One thing you should not say also, and you should teach people this by training them on an SOP for regulatory inspections, Never agree that a finding, an observation that FDA is going to write you up for or is discussing with you. Never agree and say, yes, that is a deviation, or we're not in compliance regarding that. Simply let them state it, but you don't need to validate what may be simply their opinion. Because if you write down, if you tell them, yes, that is a violation, or we understand that violation, then you're agreeing with them and saying that, yes, it is a violation. So that's for them to decide and not for your people to volunteer. Excuse me. You could simply say, well, we understand that observation and, we will send you a written response, but never agree with them. And again, if you do want to argue with them, call it a scientific or regulatory debate. There's no reason to get angry. There's no reason to raise your voice. They're just doing their jobs just like you should be doing. Treat people with respect, and hopefully they'll treat you accordingly. FDA is mandated to ensure that you follow regulations. Have you ever considered that FDA is not causing the problems? You are. You know what your problems are, so why not correct them? By following continuous quality improvement practices, you will be prepared for audits all of the time. Yes, FDA and other regulators are more strict today. That is why you must, should, and shall follow regulations. What are the consequences of cheating and hiding things and dishonesty? Are you sleeping well, knowing all about this treachery? The presidents, owners, and CEOs today can be fined and sent to prison. They are held liable today, when years ago they maybe were able to say they weren't directly involved. Well, that's not how FDA and the U.S. district courts are thinking today. The presidents, owners, and CEOs are directly responsible for any serious violations, and any type of regulatory actions taken by the agency will be taken against these presidents, owners, and CEOs, and everybody else involved. You can be disbarred from ever working in the pharmaceutical industry. Your career may be permanently ruined. You may lose your business, your homes, and your families. Is this deception worth it? I've always heard the term cheaters never prosper. Try to follow FDA guidance documents. All of FDA's internal guides and guidance for industry are available on the FDA websites. The Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, abbreviated as CDER, their website is a valuable tool to prepare and learn about CDER. Warning letters and other regulatory actions are posted on these websites. All of the FDA websites are enormously helpful in learning what to expect from FDA. And I focused on the CDER website because that's the work that I'm involved with, but all the other center websites, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health has a lot of great information for device companies. I used that when I studied for my Regulatory Affairs Certified designation from RAPS, because most of my work was within pharmaceuticals or biologicals, and studying that CDRH website helped me to learn everything I needed to know about medical devices and their regulations. And the same goes with the Center for Biologics, the Center for Veterinary Medicine, the CVM, the Center for Veterinary Medicine, pretty much goes along with the CDER regulations, because the animal drugs are supposed to be following CGMPs. I'm not familiar with the Center for Tobacco these days because that's relatively new. I've been out of the agency for some time since they started regulating tobacco. Let me stress again, all of the FDA websites are enormously helpful in learning what to expect from FDA. And I'd like to open it to questions and answers. And I want to thank you. Je vous remercie. Vielen Dank. Gracias. Arigato gozaimashita. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Brian. Well, I'd like to open it up with a question to begin with, if you don't mind. One of the questions I was thinking about is when organizations are undergoing perhaps an investigation or some sort of process where they're working very closely with the FDA, what should you do if you don't necessarily know an answer to a question which is being asked by an investigator?
That's a great question, Josie, and thank you for posing it. It's okay to not be able to answer a question, and you shouldn't, I always teach people, you shouldn't guess, I think this is the answer, maybe that's the answer. It's okay to respond to FDA. Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I will find out the answer for you, or I will find the person that can answer that question for you if you just please wait until we get a hold of that person or that answer. So you don't have to, you should never guess, you should never make an assumption, and it's okay to tell FDA or any other regulators, I can't answer that question, but I will get you someone to answer it, or I will find out the answer for you as soon as we can get a hold of it. Don't make any assumptions. Don't, I think this is right. I think they do this. Only answer something that you're familiar with.
Wonderful, thank you. And kind of part B to that question, what about if a response has been provided and what should you do if you realize that an earlier answer is incorrect? What's the best way to handle that?
Then I guess you just have to, take the hit and communicate with FDA many times. You're going to use more than one response if you get issued a warning letter or if you get issued a list of observations on the FDA 483 observations form. You may tell them something incorrectly. It's okay to send them a follow-up response. A lot of companies will send quarterly responses to update information as they progress with their corrective actions. And it's okay to simply tell them the truth, that that response that we gave you for observation number X turned out to be incorrect. We apologize for that, and we are now providing a more accurate and correct response to that. Please disregard our previous response.
Thank you. That is extremely helpful and hopefully helpful to the participants. So if there are any questions, please take this time to type them into the chat box, and we would be more than happy to answer those live. And while those questions are being thought about, I'm sure, if it's okay, I had one other question that, again, hopefully will it'd be helpful for this group. What is one of the biggest mistakes that you've seen organizations make when undergoing the inspection process? Is there any sort of, off the bat, these are some opportunities?
Yes, one thing I didn't specify closely, specifically, is not volunteering any extra information, and that's something that should be in your written procedure for regulatory inspections. You should answer questions from regulators directly. You should be answering them with more than a yes or no answer, because then they're going to think, what is it that you're hiding? But you should only be answering the question to give them a sufficient answer that responds directly to the question. You don't want to say something like, yes, we did do that, but we also did this and we do that and then we did this. Keep your answers short and simple. Don't volunteer any extra examples which they're going to be using as ammunition against, the question that they asked, which you could have simply said, yes, we did this, but we've already corrected that problem, and here's a copy of the corrective and preventive action, which we've already enacted, and leave it at that. Another similar thing is, when they summarize every year the top 100 observations given all over the world. Today, the big things are data integrity and laboratory investigations, and then not following or not having written procedures. So make sure that you're following your written procedures, make sure that you have adequate written procedures, and make sure your people are familiar with those written procedures. You don't want someone saying, well, this is our written procedure, but we don't really do that. We're doing this instead. So try to have your people, especially the ones who are talking directly with the regulators, make sure they know what they're talking about, they're familiar with your company's procedures, and they don't volunteer extra information.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, well, if there's any questions that come up in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. In terms of what's next, a big thank you, as I mentioned, to Brian and all the participants. And as far as what's next, for those of you who have found yourself in a highly sensitive position with the FDA or any other regulating bodies at some point, and have found that this may have impacted your reputation or employer brand, be sure to join me for segment 2, where we support you in repairing, redefining, and enhancing your employer brand through effective, personalized strategies that can support you during one of the most challenging employer labor markets with historic low unemployment rates, as many of my clients are communicating about. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions for Brian or myself in the future, and thank you so much for your time.